I mean, at first I just thought it was ridiculous. It's a ridiculous statement. I don't even know what it means, but it's a ridiculous statement. It's completely and utterly...
This Labour MP was caught completely off guard and embarrassed when asked about the grooming gangs inquiry.
So why won't he listen to victims and launch a national inquiry which would have the power to summon witnesses and make them give evidence under oath?
Not only Jess Phillips, but Keir Starmer is also receiving furious backlash for their vague answers on the grooming gang scandal inquiry.
People don't want an inquiry, they want action. What action? I'll tell you what Labour want. They want no action and no inquiry. And I'll tell you why. You know why.
The British public outrage over grooming gangs has reached boiling point, yet the Labour government remains tone deaf, refusing to take real action.
There is a huge furore about something a man thousands of miles away said about me that has led to an issue that I care so deeply about.
Now the criticism is growing across the globe and social media has exploded with backlash, with Elon Musk and J.K. Rowling openly condemning Labour's shameful response to the grooming gangs case.
The man you're talking about is Elon Musk. I imagine you don't want to spend much time with me dwelling on him.
No.
He spends a lot of time, you're living rent-free in his head it seems at the moment.
Yeah.
But he called you a rape genocide apologist. You were talking about how it felt painful. Were you angry about that? I mean...
Remember when Phillips rejected a request for a national inquiry into grooming gangs, insisting that a local process would work better? How shameful was it that we've seen this hypocritical excuse before? Local councils have failed for years to tackle this issue, covering up crimes and allowing thousands of young girls to suffer. And now, when people demand real action, Labour's response is to brush it aside and play the victim. That's not leadership, that's a disgrace.
And whilst, to use your words, that I'm living rent-free in his head, he obviously hasn't looked into the level of work that I have done on this over the years or currently. So it's not, you know, I've had men say worse things about me over the years. But what it makes me feel, when, you know, in the cold light of day, after you sort of dealt with how...
Stuttering, dodging, and completely failing to give a straight answer. But it's too late to cover up now. The backlash isn't just from Elon Musk. Survivors, activists, and the public are furious that Labour continues to ignore this issue while acting like they're the ones under attack. The real victims here aren't politicians who feel uncomfortable online. They're the girls and young women who were abandoned by a system that refuses to protect them. And now, Labour is doubling down. Instead of addressing the public's concerns, they're trying to shift the conversation. But the people see through it. The real question is, why is Labour so terrified of a national inquiry? What are they afraid it will reveal?
We've got, first and foremost, all this hoo-ha over the grooming gangs scandal. The Labour government saying there's not going to be a national inquiry into this. Kevin Bader not saying there should be. Nigel Farage saying, well, why didn't you do one when you were in power? Also, there's all this stuff about social care and how that's going to be reformed, but we're not going to get the proposals for another 3 years.
Time and time again, Labour has proven themselves for lying, cover-ups, and ignoring the real issues.
Without this sort of national public inquiry that is being called for, how do you join the dots between this so that A, you can learn more lessons, and B, people can be properly held to account?
Well, look, it's not like me to agree with Nigel Farage, but I do think he has a point when she was able to do some of this in government. Look, the issue for me is that we've already had national inquiries into these serious issues.
The stutter may have been just a momentary lapse, but it speaks volumes about the growing tension within Labour. The backlash against Labour isn't just about their failure to act, it's about their double standards. When it suits their agenda, they preach about justice and human rights. But when confronted with crimes that demand real action, they cower behind bureaucracy. Their hypocritical stance is clearer than ever. They'll push high tax, low growth policies to squeeze working class families dry. But when it comes to actually protecting those families from predators, Suddenly, they're nowhere to be found.
There does come a point where it's enough of the talking. Kicking this further into the long grass isn't acceptable. We need to start acting on those recommendations. We need to make sure that there is justice for the victims, for the girls. And that's really what should be the focus now of this new government, is ensuring that we deliver justice and we deliver change.
Starmer has been cautious, threading the needle between condemning the crimes while avoiding alienating key support groups.
I think Kemi Badenoch needs to stop playing politics. You know, it's a nice headline, but the reality is there are real lives here that have been affected by a real issue in parts of the country. We need to learn lessons from those inquiries that have already taken place, and we need to get people through the criminal justice system, and we need to get action on the ground for those victims.
Yes, but how can you get action for those victims?
Starmer's weak leadership is failing to address the issues that matter the most. A fraction within his party has been pushing for more direct action, calling for accountability without political correctness. During a recent interview, the MP was visibly flustered and struggled to answer.
Government meddling. Why are you sweeping it under the carpet? This isn't
We're not
about
sweeping
Oldham.
it under the carpet.
This isn't about Rotherham. This isn't about Rochdale. This is a national scandal. We need to connect the dots in order to understand. Without understanding, how can you gain any sort of justice for these victims, these young girls?
Because we already have a series of recommendations, and actually it's incumbent on this government, as it was incumbent on the previous government, to implement those recommendations and to ensure that justice is done.
People expect a confident response from a senior member of the Labour team. Instead, his fumbling left more questions than answers. He caught off guard, and there seems to be a calculated reason behind his stammering.
Is there confidence in the government that these agencies which failed these girls would not fail again?
And that's why we need to take action, not spend the next couple of years talking about stuff that we already know. And what frustrates me, Stephen, is that, you know, if Kemi Badenoch wants to play politics here, her government has had the opportunity to implement these recommendations.
What we saw from the government is a disgrace. This is a sign that Starmer's Labour Party is beginning to fracture on key issues, and speculations are going wild. This is about the safety of British children. Grooming gangs have been allowed to operate freely in multiple cities for years. Reports come in, cases pile up, and yet Labour's response is silence. The people who should be protecting the public are too afraid to even speak up. And if they can't even acknowledge the problem, how can they ever fix it? Every time they dodge responsibility, it sends a chilling message that criminals can get away with this, and the government won't stop them. How many more children have to suffer before Labour stops prioritising political correctness over public safety?
Be focused on what the Home Office and the Ministry of Justice are going to be focused on in the immediate future is building that real change so that the victims get justice and so that hopefully things like this can never happen again. We don't want to talk about it, we want to see action.
So what action is being made?
Well, we've got the list of recommendations. The Home Office and the Ministry of Justice are considering those recommendations. They will be implementing changes in a whole variety of areas.
Labour's inability to deal with critical issues has put it into clowning themselves. This isn't just incompetence, it's an utter failure of epic proportions. The public can see through their sinister plan to brush this crisis under the rug. People are sick of Labour's excuses, sick of their lying in the Southport murder case, and sick of the constant political scandals that define their governance. This is about protecting the country, and if Labour won't do it, their outrage will only grow stronger until someone finally does.
Whichever way you look at it, this is a disaster.
It is, and it's a number of issues and events that you'd expect somewhere halfway through a parliament, not necessarily still at the very early days of a government. And this is obviously on the back of goods and clothes and glasses that were bought for Keir Starmer by Lord Ali, I think it was, and taking away the winter fuel allowance. Obviously, many people feeling the pinch now because we've got the cold snap upon us.
In a fiery outburst that's rocked the political establishment, Nigel Farage has accused the Health Secretary of deliberately masking the truth about grooming gangs. With his trademark bluntness, Farage didn't hold back, insisting that the government is actively downplaying the scale of the crisis, all for the sake of political correctness.
He is getting a headache over this because, I mean, you get the attitude from the entire front bench of the present government that they just don't care what we think, they're just going to do these things anyway. And when asked about it, either they ignore the question or they just say it's down to the last 14 years of Tory government, or they just say it's because of this huge £22 billion black hole or whatever.
The Labour government simply isn't listening to what the British public thinks or values. Farage, never one to mince words, suggests the government is so desperate to maintain a certain image that they're willing to turn a blind eye to the very real concerns of ordinary people. Farage's comments on Labour reveal a growing frustration with the mainstream political establishment's reluctance to take a harder stance on sensitive issues like grooming gangs.
Let's turn to the UK now, where politicians are training their guns on Pakistan and talking about cutting aid. This is about the so-called grooming gangs, groups of men who sexually abuse and rape young girls. They've been doing it for many years and it's all documented. Now there are calls for a national inquiry on the issue. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is trying to avoid it, but the pressure is mounting. And where does Pakistan come in?
The pressure on Labour is skyrocketing and there's no denial in it now. The opposition isn't letting this go. People are demanding a real investigation, yet Labour keeps sidestepping accountability with excuse after excuse. And now, with Elon Musk's involvement putting an international spotlight on the issue, Starmer's government looks more rattled than ever. Instead of addressing the problem, Labour's response is pure damage control, acting offended rather than offering solutions. But here's the reality, the calls for justice aren't going away, and neither is the backlash against Labour's failure to act.
Some British politicians want action against Pakistan. They say cut off foreign aid. And leading that charge is MP Rupert Lowe. He's a member of the UK's Reform Party. He says Pakistan must accept and jail deported rapists. Only then should aid be given. And how much money are we talking about? Last year, it was around $50 million. It is set to triple in the coming years. In fact, Pakistan is the biggest recipient of UK aid, and Elon Musk is supporting this move.
Despite the mounting pressure, Labour has been notably quiet, unwilling to commit to any decisive action. The opposition has kept pointing out that this reluctance to tackle the issue head-on is a deliberate move, as the party seeks to avoid transferring its progressive base.
Created in Pakistan and the UK is flawed, a system that does not punish abusers. First, look at some numbers. More than 4,200 Pakistani children were abused in 2023. That's almost 11 per day. Now, sex education is virtually non-existent in Pakistan, and so is legal support. They did not have a national child abuse law until 2020. They also did not have a national sex offenders registry until 2024.
The escalation from a domestic issue to one involving international figures like Musk has only put more spotlight on Labour's handling of the situation. It's clear that Labour's careful avoidance of the inquiry is becoming less and less sustainable.
So the problem does exist. And Britons have a right to be angry. Let me tell you what happened to the Rockdale grooming gang. Their ringleader was convicted in 2012. 12 years ago. He was deported. He was ordered to be deported back to Pakistan. And guess where he is now? He is still in Rockdale. In a 140...
Starmer attempted to address Musk's comments during a press conference, but his irritation was evident. Is it a fear of what the inquiry might reveal and how it could damage the party's credibility? Starmer's defensiveness only seemed to fuel the fire. Public opinion is shifting, and many are now questioning why the Labour Party is deliberately suppressing the issue to hide its incompetence.
Thousands of girls were tortured and sexually abused at the hands of men who treated them as things to be used and disposed of, destroying many lives forever. The Prime Minister has mentioned previous inquiries. He is right, there has been an inquiry into child sexual abuse, but it wasn't about the rape gang scandal. In its 468 pages, it mentioned Rotherham just once. Is the Prime Minister confident that we know the full extent of rape gang activity?
There was also a big showdown in Parliament between Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch is the talk of the town, and let's just say, it's not looking good for Starmer. He's on the back foot, struggling to defend Labour's stance as Badenoch goes straight for the jugular. It's almost like he didn't expect to fight, like he thought he could brush past the issue with his usual political dodging, but not this time. Badenoch isn't pulling any punches, and Starmer's usual scripted responses just aren't cutting it. His party's refusal to take the grooming scandal seriously is now under a harsh spotlight, and the British public is watching closely. The more he fumbles, the more obvious it becomes. Labour is in deep trouble, and there's no easy way out.
Myths and stereotypes about victims are at the heart of this. We've known that for a decade. The J report called for mandatory reporting. I called for it 11 years ago. What we need now is action. What can't be tolerated is the idea that this afternoon members opposite will vote down a bill which protects children, include Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, let me just, one of the provisions in the bill.
For those of us who aren't glued to Starmer's every word, it's clear the guy's been struggling. We've all seen it. Starmer has no real vision and no strong punches to throw. Meanwhile, Kemi's throwing jabs like she's in the ring with a lightweight. If anyone still believes Starmer is the man to take on the Tories, they've got their eyes closed.
Have different views. We have different views across this House. But one victim from Telford says she wants a national inquiry because it will hold people accountable in a way that previous inquiries have not. Correct. It is very possible to have actions, take on more, and still have a national inquiry. So why won't he listen to victims and launch a national inquiry which would have the power to summon witnesses and make them give evidence?
This wasn't just a bad day for Starmer, it was a disaster. If Labour's supposed to be the alternative to the Tories, they need more than someone who can't even land a decent jab in Parliament. Starmer's leadership isn't just weak, it's invisible. And if Labour doesn't sort this mess out, the only thing they'll be leading is a race to the bottom.
About you, it is about the victims. Be a leader, not a lawyer. We know that people were scared to tell the truth because they thought they would be called racist. If we want to stop this from ever happening again, we cannot be afraid. The Labour Party has adopted the APPG definition of Islamophobia.
This exchange wasn't just about Starmer failing to stand up to the government, it was about him failing to stand up for the victims of grooming gangs. And that's what's so troubling. At a time when people are crying out for justice for these vulnerable young girls, Starmer's response was weak, lackluster, and completely flat. He couldn't even muster a real argument.
I do think they are. It will take time. All of the institutions will have to give evidence. That will take time. This will delay things till 2031 also. But we all, Mr. Speaker, we already know what the major flaws are. And my argument is we should get on with that action. And that's why we're bringing forward the bill this afternoon.
If this face-off proves anything, it's that Starmer's leadership isn't just stuttering, it's stalling. And no matter how much spin his team tries to put on it, there's no hiding from the truth that Labour's got a leadership problem and a failure to respond to the outrage brewing among the public. People are now tired of Labour's high-tax, low-growth policies and the endless cycle of unfulfilled promises.
Is a weak excuse. And I would say to him that by refusing this inquiry, he is enabling those people who wish to smear all British Muslims based on the actions of a small minority. He is talking about distraction tactics. Let us have the truth. The Prime Minister cannot tell the House the full scale of the scandal. He doesn't want questions asked of Labour politicians who may be complicit. He won't listen to the victims. He won't listen to the victims who are...
Starmer had the chance to show leadership on an issue that affects real people, real families, and real communities. Instead, he just showed us how out of touch and unprepared he truly is. And that's a problem for Labour and all of us.
Hundreds of depraved Pakistani monsters on Britain's streets raping and torturing young white girls. Even loads of the so-called British ones tend to have dual passports. Why aren't we threatening Pakistan with sanctions? The removal of all visas, the removal of their embassy? unless they take back their rapist animals. Get them gone. Jamaica. A Jamaican rapist in Britain can't be deported because apparently he might be bisexual, despite there not being any evidence of him being bisexual. And in Jamaica, he might face some abuse.
People are worried. They're worried about the cost of living, about crime, about the NHS being in pieces, and about a political system that just doesn't seem to care. The grooming gangs issue alone should have been a wake-up call.
Trump's supporting people, he doesn't care what anyone thinks about it, and he's slapping sanctions on people who refuse to take them. Why can't we do the same with Pakistan over their rape gangs?
Well, it's really simple because we've got a Prime Minister called Keir Starmer who's sticking his head ostrich-like in the sand over immigration and just pretending it doesn't exist. And if you just looked across the water to Europe and he saw what was happening in Europe and what happens to leaders who do what he's doing, ignore the problem. You've got.
And here's where Keir Starmer comes in. You'd think that as the leader of the opposition, he'd be showing some leadership, especially on issues like this, issues that directly impact people's lives. Instead, what do we see? A man stumbling through the toughest questions with no clear answers.
So, this is just outrageous, and people are sick to the back teeth now. And this government to not understand how they feel just shows how out of touch.
But Jake, why didn't your government, the Tories, use the kind of leverage that Trump's doing? Why weren't we pressuring Pakistan? Why weren't we pressuring Jamaica? Why weren't we pressuring Iraq and all of these places to go and take back their criminals? Use leverage, economic might.
Well, I think the first thing to say is the Conservatives did fail in the way that Keir Starmer is doing. There's no point running away from that.
The truth is, the UK is stuck in a cycle of unfulfilled promises. The public is fed up with hearing that things are in progress when they're clearly not. They want results, not more politicians telling them they're going to think about it or address it later. The country is crying out for someone who will actually get things done. And right now, the options seem to be either a government that ignores the big problems or an opposition leader who can't even stand up for the victims of those problems.
We have become a weak country, and we've become a weak country because we're overburdened by things like the Human Rights Act, we're overburdened by excessive compliance to the European Convention on Human Rights. And every single day when I wake up and turn the radio on or turn the TV on, Trump is just doing something brilliant that puts the people who voted for him, the American people, first. And we haven't had that in Britain since Margaret Thatcher, frankly.
In the face of economic mismanagement, the Labour government has no concrete plans and no real action. The British people want results. Instead, all they're getting is more of the same weak responses, political games, and a party divided over how to tackle the real issues facing the country.
Britain is weak. Britain should just take her orders from elsewhere. Britain should comply with foreign laws. No, but your whole attitude is, we can't do anything about it. Of course we can.
In this country,
why shouldn't we deport people?
Deportations are up since the election. There have been more deportation flights since July.
Labour keeps saying this. Have we ever seen any paperwork?
Why
anyone that proves that? Can I 16,000? They say.
Can I just put out? No. Who is the Home Secretary in British history? All of British history.
The UK deserves better than this. Better than weak leadership. Better than broken promises. And better than being left in the dark about the issues that truly matter. Labour MPs can stutter all they want, but the truth is out. The people see what's happening and they are not staying silent. The backlash is growing and it's only a matter of time before this entire scandal explodes in Labour's face. What do you think? Is this just another example of Labour failing the British people? Let me know in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe because we're not letting them get away with this.